So we're going to Montreal now. Sportsnet's Eric Engels joins us, which today, Derek, you may or may not believe, our last interview was our most viewed interview segment ever on YouTube, by the way. So you've got a big following out there. Yeah, you, dude. You look shocked. I don't know, man. Numbers are numbers. So, but hey, you look at this NHL power rankings coming out from NHL.com today. I got the top 5 here. Boston, Tampa, Vegas, Toronto, Colorado. The Habs are not in the top 5. They at one point were, but they're not anymore. Do you agree with those?
I guess it's done week to week, right? So I think the Canadiens lost 3 of 4 before winning their last game in Toronto, and not exactly convincing fashion. So, yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, well, like it shifts every week, and they have been in that top 5. But I'll tell you, were you on the Canadiens bandwagon? You saw some people, TSN's Craig Button, predicting that they would be the number 1 team in Canada, and they flirted with it all year. They could still finish there. Were you as big a believer in them going into the year as they've turned out to be?
I had them finishing second in the division behind Toronto, and I had Calgary and Edmonton not too far behind. And you could have probably arranged teams 1 through 6 in any order, and nothing would have surprised me by the time we get to the end of the season. So it's a tight division. I think the competition is going to ramp up. I think we're seeing the standings close as, Calgary's not performing to expectation, and Edmonton's starting to pick up their game, and Winnipeg is up and down, and Vancouver suddenly is stringing together a couple of wins. It's a division, I think Elliot Friedman put it really well, where he said, all the teams here are kind of flawed in their own respect, including Toronto, who I have kind of a little bit of a cut above. And we're seeing it so far. The other thing is particular to the Canadiens, I feel that this team, everything we've seen from them so far is what I expected, that they have a very deep team, that they can rely on any one of their 4 lines to produce, that they could rely on any one of their 4 lines to play on the defensive side, that their defense would be big and mobile and hard to play against, and that their goaltending would be a strength. And even if the numbers don't bear that out for Carey Price specifically, he's been just fine, and Jake Allen has been sensational. And I think as Price gets more action now, as the Canadiens are headed into another section of their schedule where they're playing every second night for 2 months straight and a lot of back-to-backs, he's going to get more into rhythm, and we're going to see the Carey Price everyone expects to see.
But, Carey's been there forever, and Montreal hasn't really done anything. I've watched more games of Montreal this year because of the TV alignment, which I'm loving, and I'm sure you are too. I think you said it would be a bonanza for Sportsnet. Josh Anderson's the guy that's caught my eye, and Nick Suzuki. What a trade that's been. I mean, what tinkerings have led to this hot start for the Habs?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, Josh Anderson, he'll catch your eye because he's pretty much impossible to miss on the ice with the way he plays. He's a straight up and down freight train style player who, I think I wrote yesterday, he's got a style that he looks like he's picking on the biggest, baddest dude in prison. He's not afraid out there. He goes to the hard areas. He hits hard. And when he gets mad, he picks his game up a whole other level. So I think that's something really exciting for Marc Burjman. And Marc Burjman knew exactly what he was getting when he bought this player. There's a reason why, I know a lot of eyes turned when he signed him to that contract. But again, Marc Burjman sacrificed all the leverage when he made the trade to give up Max Domi and a 4th-round pick to acquire a player that had a goal in 26 games last year. And we all know it was an injury-riddled season, but he had 27 goals the year before. And Josh Anderson was highly coveted. If you look around the league and speak to people like I do, a lot of general managers, assistant general managers, there's a number of teams that would have killed to have had a player like this. And, I think what's somewhat unexpected on his end is that, who would have anticipated that he'd get off to this good of a start after not playing hockey for essentially a year? It's a really good start. It was a confidence-inspiring start in Toronto with a couple of goals right in the first game. And from there, it's just he's exactly as advertised. He's exactly what you expect. And it fits really well with guys like Jonathan Drouin and Nick Suzuki, who have the speed and skill to find him in transition and in the rush. And the system that Claude Julien has is a rush system. And there's a chemistry that's building there that's made them one of the most effective lines in the league. And it has to do with the fact that Anderson is doing his part, but Drouin is playing great hockey. You might look at the stats and say, oh, he's got 1 goal. He's got 11 points, and the little things that he's doing on the ice, he's played very consistently and very well. And he's a fire starter, so to speak, on that line. And Nick Suzuki, you just see the skill and the smarts and at both ends of the ice and what he's working on becoming, and realize he's 21 years old and there's so much ceiling above him. He's a special player who's on his way to becoming a star, if not a superstar. And, Tyler Toffoli's had a tremendous start. Joel Edmondson is among the league leaders in plus minus if he's not number one on the list. And Jake Allen is any goaltender who's over .930 in a save percentage after playing at least 5 games is doing pretty well for themselves. So Marc Burjman made a lot of good moves here. Nothing's perfect in Montreal, but the Canadiens have played well to expectation so far. Yeah, they had a little rough patch. We expected they wouldn't be flawless throughout the season, and we'll see where they go from here.
Well, I got to ask you this. I put every morning I put my NHL leftovers from the night before on Twitter, and I said 2 good teams are going to miss the playoffs in Canada. Ottawa's not one of them, obviously. And it's fun watching the standings every night. But Riley Pollock from Sportsnet Calgary writing me and saying, Rod, there might only be 3 good teams in Canada. And I think we know Montreal and Toronto are 2 of them. But do you expect trades to start here soon? Like, at what point did Calgary and Vancouver panic a little? You mentioned all the moves that Marc Bergevin's made. I think Montreal's good. I'm sure the Leafs feel they're good. But at what point do these trades start? Jets already did it for Pierre-Luc Dubois. Do you expect some movement here in the weeks ahead?
Well, it's hard to say. Like, first of all, traditionally, this young in the season, even a quarter way through, there's not a lot of trades that happen in the NHL one way or the other. I think there has been a mindset that's been adopted among the general managers, and Marc Bergevin likes to say this a lot. You make your team in June and July. Obviously, this year was September, October with what happened and the delays in the season, and you got to live with it from that point forward. And you can't make moves in a panic. You can't make moves when you're really struggling because other general managers take advantage of you. And now there's all these other dynamics at play. And I don't think there's a GM in Canada that wasn't watching very closely what happened with Winnipeg's situation, where they tried to advance the quarantine situation and weren't able to with Pierre-Luc Dubois. And then all of a sudden they bring him in. They want to give him a lot of ice and he suffers. Is it a core injury that he's got? I don't know. I guess we don't get the details, but I think a lot of people, especially the GMs, are looking at that and saying, okay, like the trade deadline's in April, figure, at least a month out from there or 2 weeks out is when we got to make our main moves if we're going to make any. And how many of them have the incentives to give up what it requires and take the risks, especially if you're trading off your roster to bring in another piece. And I think you look at when you're in the early part of the season, whether you're a team like Calgary or a team like Vancouver, and you're looking to add something to your roster, and it might mean you have to subtract something from your roster because no team in the NHL is truly out of the race yet. Even if they've gotten off the bad starts, they're not completely out of it. And it's hard to just peel things off your roster without getting something back that you can plug in. So I think the dynamics are pretty difficult to navigate for any GM who wants to make significant changes. And I think we see what's going on in Vancouver. They're probably more likely to make a trade to make a jolt. I think what's going on in Calgary, to me, it might be the most surprising development in Canada right now, because I look at the Flames and I see a deep team at every position and 2 goaltenders that are really good. And I'm having a hard time understanding why they're not playing anywhere near expectation. They still have a winning record, but let's face it, in the last 4 or 5 games, they haven't been good enough. And the early part of the season, Jacob Markstrom played a huge role in covering up some of their blemishes. So I think Calgary is a much better team than they're showing so far. And I don't necessarily agree with the assessment that there may only be 3 good teams in Canada. I think between Montreal, Toronto, Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, and even Vancouver to an extent, they're all good teams with certain flaws on them, and we'll see who rises. We'll see where the cream is in this division.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, but I mean, it's Canada, right? So you're getting a million opinions put in your face every day, and you just got to sort out, what's what. Vancouver, Calgary, they were in the round of 16 last year, right? They survived the play-in round. They're not bad teams. I'm with you on that. But Jeff Ward saying after the game last night that they've been inconsistent over their last 5-game stretch, and nobody would argue with that. Greg Klevgard says, viewer, Calgary will make a move. It's just a matter of when. Can Can you quickly answer Ryan McCarthy's question from YouTube, Eric? He says, I got a question. What, if anything, does Eric feel the Habs need to add for a Stanley Cup run?
You know what? I think Marc Burjman has thrown a lot of the chips in the middle here, and as they go along, there will be incentive for him to add. And he's banking the cap space to potentially do it, not just to cover the overage bonuses for his rookies or, creates space and flexibility on his roster ahead of the trade deadline. There's been a lot of stuff that's gone around recently. Obviously, there's reports out of Nashville that they might be looking to sell. When you think about a player like, immediately what came to mind to me is this. And having some conversations with some people around the league, some of them provoking some of these thoughts for me, is Matthias Ekholm is a name that if he becomes available, if he's a guy that Nashville is willing to sell, which obviously they have to explore that option if they're going to sell off assets, because he's got 1 year after this one at $3.75 million. And, I just think there's going to be a lot of people in the NHL that are interested in that type of player. Marc Burjman has, a ton of prospects. He's got a ton of picks. He can fit this under the cap. He can figure out the draft lottery considerations with Seattle and not really end up losing anything of significance even to fit in a guy like Matthias Ekholm for one more year. Nashville, it's a little bit more complicated, right? They've got Yossi, they've got Fabro, they've got Ellis long term. They've got Forsberg for another couple of years. That they're going to have some considerations there, and they have to also take into account what assets are going to net them the best trade value. So, I think Matthias Ekholm is a very important player. Nashville's not only their team, but their organizational structure and what he means to the young players that are coming up. And he's the type of player that you'd circle and say, I want to keep this guy. I love this guy. But at the same time, they're just in a tricky spot. And I think as we start to approach the deadline, if that guy is actually available, that's going to be a name that becomes, everyone is going to be all over that name. And I think Marc Burjman will be at the top of the list. And I'll just add that inevitably down the line, it's quite obvious with the youth at center on the Canadiens between Suzuki and Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Jake Evans. They're going to look for sure to add some sort of veteran who can win faceoffs and provide depth at the bottom end of their roster. Potentially, that guy is playing in Nashville also. I look at a guy like Brad Richardson as a candidate to fill that role. So we'll see where it goes for Burjman, and I'm just spitting out these names. I don't know that they're available right now, and I don't know that the Canadiens are interested, but I've been looking into where they might look to improve, and if those guys are available, I could see both of them being targets.
Well, there's a tremendous answer to the Habs question, and Chris Bird in Toronto says, Calgary fans need to remember that it's not how you start, but how you finish that is most important. And Chris, I don't always want to be arguing with you, but they know hockey in Alberta. They know hockey in Calgary, and they know their team is underachieving. So in a 56-game regular season, they're raging, and I get it, because they're not playing well, and they're sitting out of the playoffs as it sits here today. Eric, we'll get to more questions next time you're on, when things really heat up. But I appreciate the update today, sir.
Oh, it was a pleasure, Rod. And I would just add to your point on Calgary there that typically when people know that the team is underachieving, you're probably not necessarily looking to the outside to change that. So I think, they've got to ask some hard questions and look in the mirror and start playing better. It's really that simple.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Eric. Have a great day, man.
Take care.
Eric Engels from Sportsnet Montreal, joining us from La Belle Province.
You're watching Rod Pedersen On Demand. For more of The Rod Pedersen Show, visit rodpedersen.com or follow Rod Pedersen on social media.